There's a quiet moment that happens to a lot of adults, usually late at night. The house is still, your phone is face down, and suddenly the thought shows up. What am I even doing with my life? Not in a dramatic way, not with tears or panic. Just heavy, dull, exhausting. You've done what you were supposed to do. You've kept going. You've shown up. You've handled responsibilities. And yet here you are, feeling strangely disconnected, like you missed a turn somewhere. But you don't remember when. If that's you, let me say this slowly, because you need to hear it. You're not lost. You're tired. Tired in a way sleep doesn't fix. Tired in a way weekends don't touch. Tired in a way that makes everything feel pointless. Even the things that once mattered. You wake up already drained. Small tasks feel heavy. Decisions feel overwhelming. And the worst part isn't the stress. It's the quiet fear that maybe this is just how life feels now. So you start questioning yourself. What's wrong with me? Why can everyone else handle this? Why do I feel so behind? But here's the truth. Most people never say out loud. When you're exhausted for a long time, your mind lies to you. It tells you that you're failing, that you're unmotivated, that you've lost your direction. But exhaustion has a way of disguising itself as hopelessness. You don't feel inspired because you're depleted. You don't feel purpose because you're worn down. You don't feel clarity because you haven't had space to breathe. And yet, instead of rest, the world keeps asking for more. More productivity. More patience. And more string. More pretending than you're fine. So you keep pushing, not because you're driven, but because stopping feels scary. Because if you slow down, you might have to face how tired you really are. And that's the moment people start thinking they're lost. Not because they don't care, not because they lack ambition, but because they've been carrying too much for too long, without being seen, without being heard, without being allowed to pause. If you've been feeling disconnected from yourself, if life feels flat and colorless, if you're wondering whether something is wrong with you, stay here. Because before you try to find yourself, before you try to fix your life, there's something far more important you need to understand. And that's what we're going to talk about next. Let's call this what it really is, because naming it changes everything. Most adults who feel lost aren't confused about what they want. They overloaded by years of responsibility without recovery, by pressure without pause, by expectations that never seem to end. Burnout doesn't always look like collapse. Sometimes it looks like sometimes it looks like irritability. Sometimes it looks like waking up every day already tired, even after a full night of sleep. And here's the dangerous part. Burnout slowly rewires how you see yourself. When you're burned out, your brain goes into survival mode. It stops dreaming. It stops imagining a future. It focuses only on getting through the day. So when you ask yourself, where am I going? Your mind answers with silence. Not because there's no direction, but because exhaustion has drowned it out. Think about how this usually happens. It doesn't start with chaos. It starts with commitment. You take on responsibility. Then a little more. Then a little more after that. You say yes because you're capable. You say yes because people rely on you. You say yes because stopping feels selfish. And slowly, without realizing it, your life becomes a series of obligations instead of choices. You don't wake up asking, what do I want today? You wake up asking, what do I have to get through? That shift matters, because the human mind isn't designed to live in constant output. It needs cyclist effort and rest, giving and receiving, pushing and pulling back. But modern life rarely allows that. So instead, you adapt. You normalize being tired. You normalize being disconnected. You normalize feeling empty. And then you blame yourself for it. You tell yourself you should be grateful. You tell yourself others have it worse. You tell yourself to just push harder. But exhaustion doesn't respond to pressure. It responds to understanding. And here's something most people never hear. Feeling lost is often your system asking for relief, not direction. Your mind isn't broken. Your motivation isn't gone. Your purpose hasn't disappeared. They're just buried under fatigue. Under years of doing instead of being. Under the habit of ignoring your own limits. Under the quiet belief that rest must be earned. That SY advice, like just find your passion, feels insulting when you're re-exhausted. You don't need a new goal. You need space to feel human again. Until you recognize that every attempt at motivation will feel hollow. Every inspirational message will feel like it's talking to someone else. So, before we talk about changing your life, before we talk about finding meaning or direction, we need to shift how you see this moment. Because this isn't the end of your drive. It's the signal you've been ignoring. And once you understand that, a very different path opens up. When you're exhausted, the instinct is always the same. Try harder. Be stronger. Push through. But that instinct is exactly what keeps you stuck. Because the way out of exhaustion is not force. It's permission. Permission to stop treating your life like a problem that needs to be solved and start treating it like a system that needs to recover. Here's a simple truth that changes how everything looks. Clarity doesn't come from effort. It comes from relief. Think about the moments in your life when things felt clear. They didn't come when you were frantic or overwhelmed. They came when you finally slowed down even briefly. Clarity shows up in the quiet spaces, in walks without headphones, in mornings without rushing. In moments where nothing is being demanded of you. That's not laziness. That's how the nervous system resets. So instead of asking, "What's my purpose?" try asking something gentler. What's draining me right now? Because removing one source of constant drain does more for your direction than adding 10 new goals. You don't need a massive life overhaul. You need small acts of honesty. Honesty like admitting you're tired without apologizing for it, saying no to one thing that costs too much, letting one area of your life be good enough instead of perfect. These aren't dramatic changes, but they create space. And space is where motivation quietly returns. Another shift that matters. Stop measuring your life by momentum. Start measuring it by alignment. You can be busy and completely lost. You can be slow and deeply on track. Progress doesn't always look like acceleration. Sometimes it looks like stopping long enough to notice where you are. And here's a grounding thought for anyone who feels behind. You don't have to figure out the rest of your life. You only have to choose the next kinder step. Not the bravest step, not the most impressive step. The kinder one, the step that costs you less energy than it gives back. That might be resting instead of pushing. It might be simplifying instead of expanding. It might be choosing peace over proving something. And slowly, without any big announcement, something shifts. You start feeling a little more present, a little less numb, a little more like yourself. Not because your life suddenly changed, but because you stopped fighting yourself. And when that happens, direction doesn't arrive like a lightning bolt. It arrives like a quiet knowing. This matters. This doesn't. This can wait. And that's enough to move forward. But to really understand how powerful this shift can be, there's a story I want to tell you next. A few years ago, I met someone I'll call Daniel, not because his name matters, but because his story might feel uncomfortably familiar. Daniel was, on paper, he was doing fine. Stable job, decent income, a life that looked responsible from the outside, but inside, he felt empty. Not sad, not angry, just drained. Every morning felt like dragging himself uphill. Every Sunday night came with a tight chest and a sense of dread he couldn't explain. So he assumed the problem was direction. He read books about purpose, listened to podcasts about success, tried to motivate himself with routines and goals. None of it worked, because the problem wasn't that Daniel didn't know what he wanted. The problem was that he hadn't stopped long enough to hear himself think. One evening, after another long day, he did something small and unremarkable. He didn't open his laptop. He didn't scroll his phone. He sat in silence. At first, it felt unbearable. His mind raced. Guilt showed up. Tux. Like I'm wasting time kept repeating, but istajed. And after a while, something unexpected happened. The noise softened. Not clarity, just quiet. That night didn't change his life, but it changed how he treated his exhaustion. Over the next few weeks, Daniel stopped asking himself big questions. He stopped trying to redesign his future. Instead, he asked smaller ones. What part of my day leaves me feeling slightly better? What part consistently drains me? He noticed patterns, meetings that left him hollow, conversations that felt performative, a constant pressure to appear fine. So, he made one adjustment. He asked to step back from a role that required constant urgency. Not a demotion, a rebalancing. It scarred him. He worried about what it meant, about how it looked. But something else happened. He slept better. He felt less irritable. He started noticing things again. Music, light, the way time moved. And only then did the bigger insight show up. He wasn't in the wrong life. He was in the right life, running on empty. Once his energy returned, so did his sense of direction, not as a dramatic revelation, as a quiet preference. What he wanted more of, what he wanted less of. Daniel didn't find himself. He stopped abandoning himself. And that made all the difference. Because when you're rested, your values speak. When you're depleted, they go silent. That's the part no one tells you. If there's one thing I hope you remember from this, let it be this. You didn't lose your way. You've been carrying more than one person was meant to carry. And when you carry that much for that long, the world starts to blur. Not because you're broken, but because you're exhausted. So if your life feels heavy right now, if your motivation feels distant, if your future feels unclear, pause. Before you judge yourself, ask a kinder question. Not what's wrong with me, but what have I been asking of myself without rest? Because the part of you that dreams, that hopes, that cares, it hasn't disappeared. It's just been waiting for relief. You don't need to reinvent your life tonight. You don't need to make bold promises or dramatic changes. Sometimes the most powerful shift is the quietest one. Choosing to stop fighting yourself, choosing to listen instead of push. Choosing to rest without guilt, choosing to believe that clarity will return when you do. And it will, because direction isn't something you chase. It's something that reappears when you finally have room to see. So, if you're watching this and wondering whether you're behind, whether you missed your chance, whether it's too late, let me leave you with this thought. A tired soul doesn't need a new path. It needs permission to breathe. Take that breath. And when you're ready, not when you're forced, your next step will be there, waiting quietly. If this resonated with you, save it. Share it with someone who feels tired but can't explain why.